Hey everyone, my name is Mike Winters and I'm live from Baltimore, Maryland, joined by Eythor, Garden's CTO, and Thor, our VP of Engineering, both co-founders who are in Berlin, and going to talk today about inner loop development with Garden. Going to focus on some things that are new in the most recent Garden core release, so some major improvements to Kubernetes hot reload with Garden, but we have some other new features to show off as well. And so in case you are new to Garden, don't know much about the company, some real quick background. So Garden was founded in 2018. Our headquarters is in Berlin, but of course we have users and customers all around the globe. And we have an open core product, Garden Core, and also an enterprise edition. So what we do, in short, is we help Kubernetes developers move faster, simplify the development process, everything from managing dependencies to spinning up environments to troubleshooting CI errors or eliminating CI errors altogether. We'll get more into that in the webinar, of course. And if you have any questions throughout, you can use the chat or the questions field in Livestorm to ask us questions. So we'll be watching for those as they come in, and love for these to be interactive. And we'll try to answer questions as they come throughout the webinar. Anything we don't get to, we will cover at the end or follow up with you via email. So by all means, please feel free to let us know if you have any questions, anything you'd like us to elaborate on. And we're going to focus on, like I said, some new improvements that came out last week in Garden 0.12.21. So everything from a Garden logs command to a new dev mode, which is our sort of new and improved Kubernetes hot reload features, and going to talk more generally about best practices for inner loop development with Garden. So how you can make developers as effective as possible and happy as possible on a day-to-day basis, keep them moving fast and not having to deal with complexity. And again, questions, feedback, comments, welcome throughout. And going to hand it over now to Eythor and Thor to start talking more about the logs command.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Eythor, CTO of Garden, and I'll start by talking briefly about the logs command, a little bit about this design and kind of the goals and kind of why we went into this project in the first place, and then give you a quick demo, show you how it works in real life, and show you a few useful, I suppose, applications of the new logs command before handing it off to Thor. I'm going to show you the new demo mode, which I argue is the main event for this particular webinar. It's made a lot of improvements on that front, so I think it's be interesting to see that. But logs command, starting with that one. So the goals for the command, I list a handful of things here, and maybe just kind of weave into the narrative, our own priorities and kind of internal culture. So recently, the engineering team got together and had a conversation where we did an iteration, so to speak, on our engineering principles and guidelines. We had a set of principles for a while now, and after 3 years of developing Garden, both core and enterprise, figured we wanted to kind of distill those into core principles. And these are basically the principles, these 3 items you see here. First one was we want to prioritize developer productivity and deep focus. And that kind of got me thinking about, is there anything in my own developer workflows where I feel like I don't have this, so to speak? And that's where the logs command came up. So previously, I would often use either K9S or Lens or similar tool to view logs while working on Garden Enterprise, like using Garden. But I would switch to these tools, which didn't feel really productive because Garden Enterprise is a distributed system, consists of several services. And you would basically do hop between services. You would open the logs for your API service, and then you need to go to your front-end service or something else. So you're kind of missing that, that kind of view of what's going on in a distributed system when all the parts are speaking to one another. So that was kind of why I didn't feel super productive with these tools, even though they're great tools in and of themselves. It's just not their focus. And speaking of focus, Garden of course has a logs command. Has always had a logs command, which does just this. It knows how to interleave the logs from all your systems. You run to Garden logs and you get all the logs. Now the problem there is every now and then it would just stop streaming logs. We were using Stern under the scene and a bunch of things where this would happen. Essentially underlying network issues. At one point, some socket closes, it's not reopening, something times out, and you're no longer streaming logs. So as you're working in your system, you have one eye on the logs, and all of a sudden they're not updated. And you're not quite sure, like, okay, so did I break anything in my code? There's a good chance I did because I'm like, working on a live system, or did the connection break? And that's when you have to like kind of restart the Garden process or look into your code, and that's what I mean by focus. Like I basically lost focus in that moment where like I stopped trusting either the Garden logs command or my own code. So that breaks the focus. So we want to fix that, and one way to do that is to design for failure, which is another kind of key principle that we identified, and I think is, I suppose, goes without saying when you're developing distributed systems. And the way that kind of is supposed to manifest in a new logs command is that it just tries really hard to never to always reconnect, essentially. So like you can see the use story below, run Garden logs when I clock in, kill the process when I clock out. It should just work. If I close my laptop and go off for lunch, come back and reopen the laptop, I expect the logs command to be still running. If the Wi-Fi goes off, I expect the same. If I redeploy a service or delete a service or whatever, I expect it to get the logs when it's been redeployed or like when it kicks back in. So this is kind of one aspect of designing for failure, and another one in designing for a failure in a system with a lot of failure points. It's not just about like having individual services robust against other system failures. It's also about like conveying that information to the user, like helping them deal with failure. And that's another thing that I try to keep in mind when improving the logs command. So kind of taking these principles and applying it to the things we do every day. And that is not to say that we don't focus on productivity and designing for failure in general, but it feels good to like be super intentional about it and kind of think about it throughout like every line of code that you write. So I think without further ado, I can just show you what that looks like.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing the slides then, and
all right. Yeah. So let me just switch to my. Give me 1 second. There you go. Oops. All right, now I bet some of you have seen this before. This is the stack graph for the vote demo. Anyone who has ever seen a Garden demo should be familiar with this particular stack graph and this particular application. It's but for those that haven't, just a brief overview. It's a simple voting app where you vote between animals, in this case cats and dogs. But the underlying architecture is quite complex, meant to like resemble your typical microservice architecture. So there are two clients, like a vote client and a result client. There's an API service. There's a Java, looks like there's a worker service that processes the votes, a Redis queue, and a database. So these are kind of the components to this vote demo. But I bet that all of you have seen this demo. Probably often wondered, okay, so I've seen the architecture, I've seen the so to speak, like the module topology, how these things fit together. But how does the application actually work? So when you're lying at sleep at night, that kick-ass Garden demo that they stole off of Docker Compose, what's really going on behind the scenes? And well, the best way to understand how a distributed system works, I suppose, is to observe it. So just show you what that looks like with the new logs command. So again, I think the first thing you'll notice here is that we had the Garden logs and the follow the follow parameter or option before, but what's new is this here. So you can choose to stream logs from 10 seconds, 10 minutes, or 10 days, or 100 days, or however long that is. So you can set that, and we can start running this. And again, the difference is this is supposed to stay robust against all kinds of network issues you might have. And another new addition is that we now color code the output. So you can see that the result service is checking for updates, and the Postgres service is selecting votes, counting in, and the result service says that nothing changed. So already we understand the system a little bit better. So I guess how it works is that the result client holds the Postgres database and that's how it gets the results into this little window here, like the catch, like the window on my bottom right. So it's not a push model, it's a pull model. We know that much already. But an open question like what's the rate or the interval at which it pulls, that's hard to tell. So with the timestamps black, we also print the timestamps with the output. So you should be able to see that, like, there's roughly, spoiler alert, it's like roughly 10 seconds between its interval. Of course, like it's much faster in real life, but I slowed it down a little bit just for the purposes of demo. I also deployed Postgres and Redis in kind of log or like debug mode, so like it logs more than it generally would.
And AC, would it be possible to make the terminal font a little bit bigger? I think it's a little bit hard to see for folks watching.
I'm sorry. Like I can also just like extend, make the terminal a little bigger.
Yeah.
Thanks for the heads up, Mike.
Sure thing.
See, like this. Make the terminal a little bit larger, and then zoom in some more. Right. Yeah. So we were just streaming the logs with the timestamps to get a feel for how a distributed system works, and this is something you can't really do with a tool like Lens or Knative. You can look at one set of logs at a time, but it's super useful just doing bit development to get this kind of color-coded output stream right away. And if I click vote, you see everything that happens. So the API service registers the vote. The Redis, the yellow one, writes the vote to the Redis cache. The Java worker processes it, and you can see it's inserted into Postgres. And then roughly 10 seconds later, the result service will ping Postgres, check for updates, and see if anything changed. And you can see here the results have been updated. I'll vote again. You notice in roughly 10 seconds, because I slowed down the whole process just to make it a little clearer, my window down in the top right should move.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, this is the first time I've seen the vote demo with all this log stuff. It's really cool to see. And it's not always simple to figure out the sequence of things with something like this.
Yeah.
Timestamps or not. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I even learned a thing or two about the vote demo that we're using all this time in working on this. So it is super useful. And one thing I found working on our own distributed systems is that if you don't have a good log experience, you tend to just not look at them. And then when debugging, say, a production incident, you deep dive into logs, and you either see a lot of noise that shouldn't be there in the first place, or logs that definitely should have been there, but you kind of missed because you don't have it in your face all the time. You might have the tests in your face, you might have the UI, but having this running is super useful. And this is one way to understand the system. So I just see kind of what happens as I'm playing around. But of course, also as you're developing, you want to you want to see those changes reflected in the logs right away. So I'm running actually the application in dev mode, which Dr. will get into in more depth later. But suffice to say that every change I make gets hot loaded into the running container. So if I, for instance, switch to the result service, I believe, I have this little stupid piece of code here that just logs a tick every second or so. And I don't have demo running, so that kind of failed there. Give me 1 second.
You change the server.
Result.
Oh, yeah, okay, I want to see that.
That's what I'm doing.
There you go.
So excuse me, this will only take a handful of seconds because Garden knows what's built and deployed before and won't do any unnecessary work. So it's just redeploying the result service in dev mode just so I can get my point across, which is that as you're developing, you don't just want to see the logs when you're playing around with the app. You want to see it update as you write the code. So you see here, it's in watch mode, so the server has restarted. And let me see to that. Yeah, and now if I enable the ticks, you should see the server restart right away, and now you see the ticks coming in. Nice. So as you're developing, you're getting the feedback right away, and and you're not like fighting your log system wondering like is something going down. This will continue to stream. I mean, once we've nailed the final implementation, just to add in there, like we haven't released this yet. It's still like on the feature branch, hoping to get it in there with the next release. And like I said, the goal is just for this to run. You can, take your weekend off or what have you, and then come back to your laptop Monday morning, and this should still just work, and you don't have to fight your network or whatever and kill processes and restart them. At least that is the goal. So if that's not the experience you're getting, by all means, relay that feedback to us. But I also talked about, getting information to the users. Right now, we're just streaming the logs from the services proper, but there's also a, you can also set the log level on the log level to debug on the command proper, so you can also see what Garden is doing, under the hood to, maintain that connection. So if I just focus on the result service, for instance, and this is useful if something is not working the way it's supposed to be, and comes back to this point of like kind of designing for failure, not just in having your system robust, but also giving appropriate information. So you get a little bit more logs here as it's starting up, and you see like the thing like in the kind of parentheses here, Garden's telling you that it connected to the container. And now if I go ahead, probably do this in the same screen. Let's see, you can do like this.
Yeah, there you go.
That's better. So now if I go ahead and Garden, delete service result, basically the logs command is not gonna die on me. Like eventually it will lose connection to the result pod. You see, you get the get like appropriate information here, like unable to maintain connection to the container, and it's gonna retry in the background. You don't see this unless you're in debug mode. So like there's no noise per se, but if something is not working the way you would expect it to work, this is a kind of useful way to get at that. And you'll notice now that when I deploy the result service, it's going to be a new pod, the new version has and everything, but it's still going to connect automatically. So kind of as you're developing, switching between dev mode and not, redeploying different versions of the code, deleting services, deploying them again, the logs is just gonna like chug on and continue connecting to the services as soon as they're back up. So again, for the developer, you shouldn't have to worry about basically restarting and refreshing this command, time and time again. So you see now it's reconnecting, and now it's still logging the ticks. So that's basically the gist of it, but just to kind of show you a few more useful things. So Garden logs help. So beyond adding the since flag and the color coding, we also have like means for you to say like, Garden logs result, or just all the logs for that matter. You can hide the service part. You can show the original color, and essentially like get just like the raw log outputs as they are, like straight from the container, as opposed to like having the Garden stuff in there if that's what you need. And finally, just the old logs command works just like it did before. And I don't know if you all are aware of this, but you can let me see. So you can output the logs from the main command, not the follow command, as JSON, which looks like Garden logs. Let's get these logs from the last 100 seconds as JSON. And I mean, usually when you're working with logs, like if you have a lot of output, you want to dump it to a file, and you can like search through a file and what have you. But it's also useful to get the JSON output, and then you can pipe it into. Sorry, like the controls are messing with me. You can pipe it into a tool like JQ. And for instance, here I'm getting all the logs, piping it into JQ, and searching for messages that contain count ID, and I basically just get the Postgres logs. So like, there's a lot of extra utilities there, whether it's like parsing it as JSON or controlling the output of the log that we kind of improved with the new logs command. Some of this we do before already, like the JSON output, but in case you weren't aware, just wanted to get that across. And yes, I don't think I have much to add to that. I'm just going to hand things over to Thor.
There was one question from the chat. Asking what is the underlying implementation for the new log mechanism? Did you do improvements in the existing library that's used before, or did we rewrite everything from scratch?
Yes, that's a great question. So previously we were using Stern. It was a kind of a crude method. We would just literally shell out to Stern to read the logs and pipe that output to your terminal. What we're doing this time is we're interfacing directly with the Kube API via the Node Kube client, and the client has a function for getting logs. Read namespace logs is what I believe it's called. It doesn't work too well with streaming. There are like open issues in the repo where it just the follow parameter doesn't work as expected. So they added a new log class which you can use, and that's what we're using. So essentially, to wrap it up, we use the Cage JavaScript, Kubernetes JavaScript client, use their functions, and then we just add a bunch of stuff on top of that for sake of robustness. So this is kind of intended for for dev mode. We wouldn't really do this if you're just getting a dump of logs, but this is kind of intended for dev mode, we're streaming. So for instance, we listen to events on the API returns the request, so we listen to the events on the request and on the socket as well. And because there's a known issue where if the socket is idle for too long, the connection just drops.
Yeah.
And there's not much to do about it, and there's no way to catch it. So for instance, if the connection at the socket level is idle for more than 30 seconds, we don't know if it's because the no logs are streaming from the service or because it actually broke, then we still kill the connection and reconnect. So it's little things like this, constantly trying to basically ensure everything is okay. We also poll for all the pods in the namespace every 10 seconds to compare the actual pods against kind of what what log connection we have. So if there's a pod there that we're not connected to, we know that right away and we reconnect. Nice. So little things like that to again keep this kind of old log train chugging along, so to speak.
So there's one final question. Not final. There's another question. He asks if Stern is not used anymore at all.
So that's a good question. When I was researching this, I noticed that Stern, the library, has not been updated for I think almost 5 years. So wow. If you check out their GitHub repo, it's just completely dead. That being said, I mean Stern works just fine. It's what it's what we've been using up until this change. So I don't know, I'm assuming it's kind of abandonware at this point, but it seems to work. But I opted for interacting directly with the API because of, among other things, the fact that Stern just isn't supported, and I didn't see a lot of other options. So I figured, okay, no one's supporting Stern. I'll just pick that other Kubernetes logs tool that everyone's using and see if I can use that as the underlying mechanism.
Yeah.
I didn't find one, so that's why I went straight to the API.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it from my end. Yeah, so I'm switching back to the webinar UI now, so I can see the question from Kostas. I hope that clarifies the matter. But happy to take it offline as well if you have further questions and expand on the implementation.
I'm looking forward to using this myself, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah, me too. I mean, again, this goes back to I mentioned our first engineering principle kind of being prioritizing productivity, developer productivity. Now, our main developer productivity tool just happens to be Garden.
Yes.
So by prioritizing that, we are prioritizing Garden and all our users. So it kind of, it goes hand in hand. And I hope, both us as users of Garden and, everyone else, kind of benefits from this. And yeah, if there are any further questions, just holler at me. But in the meantime, I think I'll hand it off to you today.
Thank you. Right. So some of you may be aware of this, but we released a new mode to complement and eventually replace the old hot reload functionality in our last release. We call this dev mode. What this essentially is It's a new sync implementation to underlie hot loading with Garden. We used Mutagen under the hood, unlike the old implementation, which used rsync. So there were some problems with the old implementation in that, for example, on Windows, rsync is a bit problematic. For large projects, the indexing of everything could be a little bit slow. And in general, because it was going through Garden's built-in watch mechanism, we had to do some throttling there. It just, I guess the takeaway is that we learned certain things sort of through battle testing, and we applied all those learnings in the new implementation. And now this new implementation is kind of the fastest, is like after with the very fastest and most stable available among all systems. So we're really proud of that. And of course, big shout out to the folks at Mutagen for making that excellent piece of technology. What we're really doing with dev mode is providing that simple configuration interface where you tell Garden which folders to sync where, whether you want it to be bi-directional syncing or not. And Garden takes care of the lifecycle management around the Mutagen daemon and setting all that stuff up, but kind of delegates the heavy lifting and all the platform-specific path handling and so forth to Mutagen. So what this is all about, this comes back to the larger topic of this webinar here, is the inner loop with Garden. So the logs command helps you keep track of everything that's happening in your system as you're working on it, like, you know, all the activity, as you saw that the database entries being created, things being polled, stuff, everything that's happening in sort of a time-ordered fashion. The other half of that is which you partly saw in the logs demo, is your system kind of keeping up with you as you work. So taking a step back, when you are working on a stack that has several services in it, without Garden, you typically have this trade-off of being able to run one or a few services locally, or maybe with Docker Compose, as much as your development machine can cope with. And then you can't really run integration tests or do sort of some larger or high-powered tasks in that environment. So you have to lead on CI or staging or so forth for that. So there's this trade-off like power or sort of comfort and responsiveness. And so what dev mode is really all about is bringing that comfort and responsiveness and speed to the full powered development environment that you get by default with Garden. So with dev mode, what you get is you make changes to your code. Garden through Mutagen syncs your changes into the running container, where in whatever language or application server specific way that suits you, you recompile or you restart the server. And then you get this, well, depending of course on framework, for stuff like JavaScript and Python or Ruby, any dynamic language, or really any language that has a built-in hot loading functionality on the application server level, or maybe it doesn't require recompilation. This is like perfect. You don't have to rebuild the image. It's very, very snappy. But even for a lot of compiled languages, you know, be it Go or TypeScript or whatever, you often have incremental compilation available, or ways to maybe tone down the optimization setting so that the compiler isn't spending too many cycles on going through all the optimizations to get those fast incremental compilation times. It's very often possible to get build time, to get rebuild and sort of hot load times that are quite snappy. Of course, your mileage may vary there, but essentially, what you get there is you're able to make changes locally. You're able to see them reflected in the running system, whether it be a web page or an API. And at the same time, you're able to run your integration tests as you go. You're able to develop integration tests and run them as you go. You're able to TDD your unit tests and your integration tests across several services. And also, which is very useful in this context, if you create things like, for example, database migrations or any other generated files inside your container that you later want to check into version control, you can simply specify that you want a two-directional sync for this particular folder, and it gets synced back. What this really facilitates is using the remote service as your development environment. It's the place where you're running your shells, you're doing your focus tests, you may be creating database migrations, you're doing all kinds of stuff, and that gets brought back home. So without the bidirectional sync, it's a bit clunky having to copy things back, but that kind of really facilitates a lot of these workflows where you're able to treat the remote environment as kind of the workspace, and then. Or, you know, depending on your setup, you may want to do a compilation in there. For other setups, it's also useful to, for example, if your builds are faster locally for any reason, to simply have fast incremental builds running on your local machine and then syncing them into the remote service. But we'll go over some of the best practices and common patterns in the slides after the demo. But what this, the deliverable for all this really is you start working on a branch or a pull request. You fire up dev mode with the services that you're going to be working on, compiled, configured for dev mode. The other services, it depends on which services you need to be working on, and then you just go off. You write, you debug any errors that you notice. You iterate on that. You write integration tests as you go. You're running them in the shells, maybe creating database migrations, and then you submit your pull request. And by then, you've been running your integration tests all along, because you've been doing all this in a full-powered Garden remote development environment. So you can be reasonably confident that your changes are going to pass CI. So yes, that's kind of it's the other half to the logs command, so to speak. It's providing that first-class inner loop experience without sacrificing the power of the environment and the capabilities that you have access to during your inner loop. So I think I will go into the demo now.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Maybe I should fire up the demo.
Yep.
Got one question from Maddie.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. But basically, when in switching to Mutagen,
yeah,
does anything change in terms of dependencies or requirements? Anything the user needs to do, whether at the Kubernetes level, at the local level, to use the new dev mode functionality? Do I need to do anything after I update Garden?
That's a good question. And fortunately, the answer is you don't have to do anything. So essentially, the way this works is Garden has a general purpose facility for downloading the tools that it needs, be it kube control or Helm or whatever. Mutagen falls into this category. So Garden will automatically download and maintain its own copy of the Mutagen binary. And in terms of what happens inside the cluster, Garden will automatically inject an init container and sort of modify the deployment slightly and install what it needs inside the container. And that's all done sort of magically in the background by Garden in a way that's very generic and won't interfere with anything that your application container is doing. So it just transparently works. And this means that, again, when you're rolling out a Garden project to a large team, the system requirements and the libraries and tools that have to be set up by our developers are absolutely minimal. And in a way, it's easier than the old Helpful implementation in that, there isn't the rsync thing.
Yeah.
Mutagen Garden just downloads Mutagen, and the user never actually has to know about Mutagen except if there's an error message where that might crop up. Yes.
Yeah, so let's hop to the demo.
Yes. I'm going to just share my screen. Yeah. There we go. So what I've got here is
what demo project is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's the same project, but it's actually my own copy of it.
There you go.
This is interesting, a little tidbit here. You saw that it was an AC.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see.
Oh, that's actually
You got my username, local username here in the. We're using the same DNS, but this is kind of as a side note, a demonstration of the fact that AC and I can have our own sort of namespaces with all the stuff without treading on each other. Like, he can change stuff in his demo, and I don't have to worry that my demo is going to go awry at the same time.
Exactly. They're both part of the same Garden project.
Yeah.
We're running in the same cluster, different namespaces, and Garden actually manages that whole complexity for us. We don't need to even worry about it.
Yes, that's right.
We're looking at the same configuration on our laptops, but then behind the scenes, different namespaces, different host names.
And again, neither of us has Docker or Kubernetes running on our laptops, which I never get tired of saying. So this comes with a very minimal load to my laptop, which is getting a little bit old, but I don't really mind because I'm using Garden. So that's that. Anyway, so we're looking at the same project. I deployed the Vote and the API services in dev mode, and in the configuration for these services, I specified dev mode. Now you see, for comparison, I had the old hot configuration above. It's basically very, very similar. The main difference is that for container modules, the sync spec goes into the service definition, whereas previously it was kind of on the module level. It's very, very similar for Kubernetes and Helm services. It's basically like, if you already have hot load set up, you basically copy paste your sync specs. The main difference in terms of the configuration is this mode thing here. So by default, the sync is one directional. That is, it goes from your dev machine into the remote service and not backwards. Whereas if you use the two-way sync, if I make a change in the source directory in the remote service, it gets synced back to the source directory here. But it won't. Yeah. So the sync only applies to the sort of subdirectory that I specify there. Another thing that's very important to note here, which I forgot in the introduction, is that a lot of times when you're configuring hot reload, you run into problems with, like, for example, you want to sync in built artifacts, like your build directory, your disk directory, stuff that's garden ignored or get ignored. But for the purpose of hot reloading, you want to include that. And there's, like, it can be a bit awkward. But the sync configuration for dev mode completely bypasses that. So you literally just say, take this directory, put it over there. Take that directory from over there, make that bidirectional, and that completely bypasses the rest of it. So it's very simple, very intuitive to configure, and you have absolute freedom in terms of picking and choosing. You can, like, I could say, like, make this one directional and pick some subdirectory of that to make that bidirectional. For example, if that's the directory where your database migrations get generated, but you might not want to sync everything back, you can basically pick and choose, and you won't run into any conflict with your includes and excludes and your ignore files. And essentially, yeah, this. Oops, what did I do? Did I change something? Nope. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Oh, did I change something? Oh yeah. Yes. Okay. I made a change to the configuration for the mod service. Yeah, so it got redeployed. Yeah. All right. So this is the classic demo. You actually already saw Eythor do this. Let me just go. The log was a bit ugly there. I just want to clean this up a little bit here. So wait for this to come up again.
While we wait, Cost is another question in terms of whether there's a performance hit for two-way syncs compared to one directional.
I don't think so. No, I mean that not in terms of. I mean, Mutagen performs quite well. It doesn't have to do a lot of indexing. I'm not actually that aware of what the performance implication will be, but I suspect it would be shared then by the process on the server side and on the client side. But it is, in general, I think, a big advantage of Mutagen over rsync in this context is that you have kind of a warmed up daemon process that kind of maintains an index of the files that have been changing, so it can diff that in memory. So there's less of this constant re-indexing and re-scanning, which can get a bit heavyweight for larger projects. Which used to mean that, like, hot reloads for big projects could take several seconds if you have thousands and thousands of source files.
Exactly. In fact, like, Mutagen is agnostic to what's a source and what's target. It takes in terms of alphas and betas.
Yes.
So there's so I suppose it boils down to the resources. Server side, and Cost is also asks why two-way sync is not enabled by default. Well, I mean, first of all, that would just kind of be a breaking change for users that are like, well, it's actually, well, it is a new command, so I suppose you could argue that it's not a breaking change, but it's consistent with the behavior as it was before, which I think, like, our users have come to expect. And you don't always want that. Sometimes, like, you're creating temp files or whatever in the remote or something generated that you don't want to sync back, and in those cases, for me, it makes sense to opt into it, but I think it really depends on what you're used to as a user.
I think the rationale there is that generally when you want things synced back, it is in kind of a limited context. You maybe want to say, like, okay, just take the source directory and put all that in there. But a bunch of stuff might be getting created. You have temp directories, you maybe logs, all kinds of stuff, and which is kind of annoying by default. Whereas the two-way sync is like, it's great, but like, just in case, just so you know what you're opting into, so you don't come complaining about my laptop's full of temp files.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally just a matter of putting in that stanza there. So we've seen the dogs chase the tigers. This is also another demo classic. But I also want to show you the two-way sync here. So here I'm running.
You already changed the. I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just take this back to dogs. Dogs. There you go. This is faster than the old hot reload, by the way. And of course, most of the delay we're seeing here is actually the app server restarting itself and the WebSocket doing the hot mods reloading. Now, this is just what I just showed you there is just really faster hot reloading. But to show you the bidirectional sync, so for the vote service here, we have a bidirectional sync set up for the /app/source directory inside the container to the source directory inside the vault service. So here I'm inside /vault/source on my local machine, and I'm running a shell inside the vault service and in /app. So if I create a file here, not in the source directory, foo into bar, it doesn't show up, which is what we expect, because we only specified it for that subdirectory, which shows like, if you only sync back what you want in that case. But if I go to source, echo llama to the file mammal, and go into source, there's mammal, source mammal, and you guessed it, it's the llama.
Bam.
And what I want you to imagine here is that instead of saying echo llama, I was doing like, I don't know, Rails generate migration or whatever, and then I can sync back, and then you can check that into version control. And what that really enables is like, what you want to be doing with hot loading in general is in here, I might be running like npm run test integ and only run like the component I'm working on or whatever, and use the remote service as your development environment. Because here everything's hooked up. It's hooked up to the database, to all the services, all the Nator configs there, all the configs there. So it's the perfect place to orchestrate your dev workflow. So not only are we hot loading the service and checking the browser and using the logs command to view the logs, this is the place where you do your TDD. You make changes, you recompile the code inside the running container, you run your test, you write your test, the test gets synced in, and this way you're really only running a very, very limited part of your stuff on the local machine. You're really only just doing the code and Garden syncing it into the remote container, and the heavy lifting is done inside the container, which means also that like for a developer to get started with integration tests, the setup is very minimal, which also encourages people to write integration tests. So what we find often is that like running an integration test suite or an end-to-end test suite is often like you have to follow this sort of steps. You have to have this in your environment, but it's not quite documented in there. So you have to ask Steve, and Steve's on vacation, and so people kind of shy away from that, and it's only done inside the CI system. But with Garden, you have access to everything. It's configured the same way for CI and during development, which means that you're running on integration tests, writing them, running them. It's all kind of batteries included, wrapped up with a bow and presented to you, which really lowers the barrier of entry to developers who may want to write more integration tests, which ends up lowering the marginal cost of writing one more integration test case, and which is a good thing. So again, making it feel like you're developing locally, making it feel like you're developing one system, but you can use the tools and frameworks that are appropriate for each service natively. And Garden kind of just like delegates. It's almost like a router that brings you to the optimal tools for whatever service that you're looking at, but at the same time enables you easy access to test interactions between components, follow the logs, where integration tests, write them. So what we're trying to bring here is this kind of best of both worlds experience, as fast and responsive as local, but it still feels like one system, and you are indeed working against the real thing, the entire system running, interacting in a production-like fashion. And so by the time that you hit CI, you've been developing against and testing against a system that is exactly the same. But again, dev mode is important in bringing that responsiveness and that sort of focus and flow, because it needs to be able to keep up with you. And this is kind of what bridges the gap from local to remote. That is that. Oops. How do I stop sharing?
You're still sharing.
Well,
Infinite webinar.
Infinite webinar, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yes. Likewise, I'm really excited to play around with, or like not play around, use every day as part of my workflows, the new dev mode command. I haven't touched the
yes,
in a while. So.
And I think it's kind of like I mentioned it almost not quite in passing, but like the fact that it bypasses includes and excludes. Yeah. That's a subtle point. Yeah. But it really adds so much flexibility here. It makes it so much easier to build things locally. Yeah, we
get into that in the.
We'll get into that in the next slides.
Yeah. But it's a very good point. And I mean, having seen the new logs command, new dev mode command. Obviously, the topic is inner loop, and a lot of people from our community, on our community Slack or our community site, ask us like, what are the best practices? And the reason that we haven't just documented that, that being said, we can do a better job of documenting things in general, but the point is that, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and there are things to consider. And I think, depending on what you're trying to do, you might want to consider either compiling locally, like we're mentioning, or in the container, using focused commands, restarting your service manually instead of every single code change in your IDE, and maybe skipping dependencies when you're in the demo workflow.
So there's a question that came in about compiled languages,
which
is an interesting point there. Like, for example, for Go, like when you're using a compiled language, it of course depends on if the application server that you're using natively supports hot reloading. But what you can often do is use something like a command line tool. I'm just going to write this in the chat. ENTR.
It's actually in the next few slides. We get into all that.
So we'll get into all that.
Yeah,
we're going to get into some workflows that are more sort of pertinent to the static type stuff. But go on. Sorry.
No, fine. Let's make sure we answer this question. But just before we hop on to the next slide, I just want to also add that last but not least, make inner loop DevX a top priority.
Yes.
And the sooner you do that, the sooner you reap the benefit. First of all, you'll have more productive engineers, and you will have happier engineers. And because nothing frustrates an engineer more than fighting their tools, doing plumbing work, waiting for CI, what have you. As long as that is your top priority, then you should be in good shape.
Yes. And I just to go on my soapbox a little bit, I feel like as an industry, we have a lot of us have sort of been giving up on being able to achieve a productive inner loop with container development. And we need tooling to address that, and Garden is it does deliver on that, and that's kind of one of the primary motivations behind Garden is bringing the development side up to speed with how we operate the systems. And yes, we deserve a good inner loop as an industry.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just the time wasted globally. Imagine just it's just slowing down.
It's slowing down delivery, and it's and
our economies.
We waste hours and hours on waiting, and we feel stymied, and we start thinking is it my fault? Am I not working fast enough, and so forth? We end up frustrated and unproductive, and it's solvable. Yes.
But let's just
we
could easily spend another hour ranting about this particular topic. We could do a lot of that. If you want to join our weekly Friday community sessions, they often kind of segue into just this topic. But Mike, if you want to go to the next slide so we can keep the ball rolling. So I mentioned this relates a little bit to what Kostas is talking about, and I think the slide after also gets into a little bit. But compiling locally versus in container. So that's kind of the point of the new dev mode functionality. It makes it a lot easier to basically pick and choose what you want to sync. So a lot of cases, say you have a dynamic language such as Ruby or Python, you just want to sync the code straight over. There's no compile step, nothing to worry about. Likewise, if your builds are relatively efficient, both time and resource-wise, if you can afford just building them in the mode container, by all means do that. And likewise, if you don't want to worry about having dependencies on your developers' machines, or not that they don't have fancy machines that are able to do all the building that's required, I think building remotely is still a good decision. But then you have shops like ours. So we're kind of a TypeScript Node.js shop. We all have relatively beefy laptops, even though Thor is getting a load, and we use Node.js to build Garden core, which we don't use Garden to build Garden core. It's just we have all dependencies, everything set up. The bulk of Garden Enterprise is also written in TypeScript. So, we have these tools already on our relatively beefy laptops. We have, we've gone through the exercise of setting up the local build processes for Garden core. So for a shop like ours, it makes sense to maybe just build things locally and ship that over to the remote. So for instance, we could, do something like npm dev or yarn dev locally that watches all the different modules or subset of modules in the system, and with TypeScript in kind of watch mode, it compiles super fast, code base the size of ours, it recompiles when it's doing an incremental recompile in watch mode in like maybe 500 milliseconds. And then that gets shipped over the wire in 500 milliseconds, and it's just there and compiled. So that's a good choice in that setting.
And that's where, this cryptic thing that I wrote in the chat, ENTR, comes in there. When you have a web server that isn't like built from the ground up to handle reloads, you want to restart the server without the container crashing.
Yeah.
So ENTR is like this kind of process that runs the server, listens for a change to a file or directory, and then restarts without the process going down. So that's kind of something like that.
Go forward 2 slides. I think it's not the next one, but the one after.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, okay, there you go.
But this is exactly what Thor here was saying, is that what we sometimes do, like, we're still syncing the code on every single change. Well, we can choose to build locally and then sync it over the wire, or we can build it remotely. But you don't need, again, depending on how fast your server starts up, but in some cases it's a little slow, and you don't need that server restart on every single file change. They whether you're having running node in watch mode or something else, you just don't need that. You're writing code, you hit save, then you write some more code. So what we sometimes do is, have ENTR, which is this process that Thor was describing, watch a single file in the remote, so it's not like opening up a bunch of file descriptors. It's not doing anything resource intensive. It's just watching a single file in a temp here, and then I write my code, I write some more code, and maybe a little bit more, and then I just run a command like garden exec my service, and I touch the file in temp here, and then my server restarts in like a handful of seconds.
Do you know if ENTR does throttling?
I think it does.
It does. Yeah. So
there's an option for it.
So that might be a good call. Like it's like, if it's okay if you have rapid restart, so long as they're like not more than like once a second.
Yeah, I think
you can do that.
I'm pretty sure there's like there is a command line option where like if it is in the process of restarting, it will bounce requests, something like that.
Yeah.
So or I don't know if it or handle like the last request after it finishes like the first restart.
Yeah.
I think like there is some sort of functionality for that, but I need to dig a little bit deeper. But that is the point. Sometimes you wanna, like with the good old voting app, you want cats versus dogs to change on every time you update that particular section. But there are times where you just want to write your code and then pack up and write it for 15 minutes. I want to run a single garden command. You can also wrap this in a task. We have a task called garden run task restart the API server, and it does just that. And you just do it opportunistically when we need a live version of the API. So it's not like constantly restarting it. Sometimes crashes because of that.
And for Java, I haven't set a hot running for Spring Boot or Java for a while, but like you can, of course, you also have Maven or something that does builds across different modules in the project, and maybe and you have your IDE. You might want to do that stuff locally. Yeah. But there are, often these Java servers may have like a hot run functionality in the server. You might want to sync the target directory or the jar. So there's various ways of doing that. So basically, any combination of local building, which directories are going to sync the best artifacts. It just, it depends on what has the best performance profile, depends on the size of the project and so forth. But like, there's an array of options to choose from there. So like you don't have to let go of your local experience. It's just a matter of what gives you the best developer experience, the best sort of performance.
To speak to Go specifically, because Kostas asked about this, we actually have an example for this in our GitHub repo, which we now need to update with dev mode. But this would be my recommendation. If you're a Go developer, compile Go locally and have Garden and the Mutagen process have it watch the build binary, and every time it's been rebuilt, send it over the wire and use ENTR to restart that process. It's super lightweight, it happens super fast. Go compiles really fast locally, and I think that would just be a solid workflow. And then you get the binary over the wire, it compiles likely faster locally than in the remote. Assuming you're the Go developer, you have the dependencies, like there's not a lot of work happening there. You're good to go. Another use case was Rust shop, right? Let's look in the garden, where they don't have the luxury of having all the dependencies installed and linked and everything locally. So that
because they're building for another architecture. The container is Alpine, but your dependency is development is Linux or Mac. You could address that maybe by building for another architecture and having the local linked libraries set up another way. Actually, I do think that could work, but I guess the takeaway is like it takes some mixing and matching sometimes to come up with the most performant. But our approach is like to provide all the Lego blocks you need to build your particular castle, so to speak. And new dev mode really does that.
Yeah. And maybe just to briefly, so there's one slide before. I'll briefly gloss over that. It's not super important, but maybe we could scroll. Yeah, there you go. So the other suggestion I wanted to make in terms of inner loop best practices, the garden dev command does a lot in its current state. In particular, it runs your tasks for you, which may not be what you need. We actually want to improve this. We want to kind of bake the logs command and just show you into it.
Yeah.
But until we do that, I would recommend something more focused. For instance, garden deploy and set your API in front end in development mode, or however many services you need in development mode, but maybe not more than that. And in terms of both using focus commands and staying focused, lean on Garden for the other tasks as well. I sometimes found myself again, when I'm using Lens, then I'm shelling into a pod in Lens, and I need to think I need to map a running pod to a Garden service kind of in my mind. Usually it's relatively easy.
Yeah.
But if I'm in my terminal, I can just do Garden exec API pin shell, and I'm there, and it gives me the same experience.
Yeah.
And I'm not switching tools. I'm not losing my focus or getting out of the zone. Same goes lean on Garden for tasks, which is resetting your database, initializing it, running things we start API server, which I mentioned we do on our end. The logs commands are so it's lightweight, small Garden commands that just really help you interact with your system, get more visibility, move things around, and are not as heavy as say a full build or a full deploy. I really recommend doing that. And yeah, in general, stay in the zone and avoid hopping between tools.
Yeah, and it's also very important in terms of if you're the one on your team who is responsible for delivering the developer experience for the rest of the team, the Garden commands can make this a lot more accessible for developers who aren't particularly opsy. Just I want to get a Ruby shell or a Python shell in my container, but what's the pod called again? It's Garden exec, whatever it is, or start the IRB thing or whatever in there, and then you can make changes on the infrastructure side, and Garden kind of mask some of that while still being, you're still able to inspect it, but it's you present your developers with kind of a simple to use palette of productive tools to use that kind of grow with you.
Exactly. I think there's one more slide, just real quick. I noticed we're running out of time, and we want to leave some time for questions. As this is one more, so it's the one after. Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's real briefly. This is another one we want to support better natively, maybe add options for it. But if you're in deploy mode and you're working on your API service, I don't know if you can see the piece of the apple there, but the API service, which I'm maybe running in dev mode, has a dependency on my expensive Java module, which means that every time I get change to the API service, it will need to redeploy. So we just is the dependency actually supposed to be the other way around? But the point is, you can disable the module that you don't want to redeploy to.
It's correct.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I had to kind of squint my eyes. But the point is, it may be useful to put a disabled flag on certain modules when you're running either in dev mode. You can actually make this more accurate, and you can say if command.params contains dev, and if command.params.services contains API. So do not mess with the expensive Java module if I'm just doing focus work on the API service. There's more examples in the documentation, and you can call it a hack or a workaround for now, and we're looking to bake this into Garden proper and give you better dependency control, say, in particular in development mode.
Another similar use case for this is, for example, if you're doing rebuild and so forth inside the container when you're using dev mode, you might want to increase the CPU and RAM conditionally. But if you're just deploying the standard version of it, where you're not doing it's the lightweight node service or a Go service or whatever, it's not doing that much. But if you're doing a lot of recompilation in there, you might want to condition if I'm in dev mode, then bump the CPU and the RAM up, but only when I'm in dev mode.
Yeah.
So you get some flexibility there as well.
We actually do the same. Just let that. We do the same for a Kubernetes module that we're using. We change the liveness probes.
Yeah.
If in dev mode, because then the assumption is that every now and then we're seeing code restarting a running container process, which might cause the liveness probes to fail because it's not responding. So we bump those up in dev mode, so it cuts it a slack. Yeah. So to speak. There's one more question from Kostas.
Yes.
We're running out of time. So he asks, does Mutagen sync binaries equally well compared to like?
As far as I can tell, yes. I mean, of course, it depends on the number of files and how big they are, but there is no fundamental distinction, I suppose. I mean, how smooth the reloading process is, of course, depends on the particular framework. You know, if you're updating something in place that the running server expects to be there, your mileage may vary, but yeah, it's fast. I mean, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna have to cut you guys off. If you want to add more to that in the chat while I'm wrapping things up, that's fine, because that chat is still visible to folks if they come back to this room with the same used before. So it's all in there. And so just wanted to give a quick shout out for Garden Enterprise. If you're interested in what you heard about today, what we were talking about was available in Garden Core, open source product. But if you're looking to get started with Garden really quickly, get help from the Garden team, have an out-of-the-box solution to manage users and secrets, and automatically clean up environments that are idle so that you can save money, save time. Garden Enterprise is right for you, and going to start offering this as a managed cloud service in the very near future. You'll hear more about that soon, but I'll go ahead and give you a little sneak preview today. And so feel free to get in touch with us. I'm going to send a follow-up email with the recording and all of relevant information related to this release, so that you can check it out yourself if you'd like. And you can always respond to that email. You can go to garden.io/contact to reach out. We're always just happy to talk, even if you're not sure if Garden is the right fit. Kick around ideas, see if there's a way that we could help, or just share what we've learned. And so thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to our engineering team for building an awesome product, for the community for giving us a ton of feedback along the way, and really making it all possible. And appreciate all of you who joined us. So have a lovely rest of your day. And guys, what do you say? Are we going to be on Discord tomorrow? We're going to be doing a little office houring tomorrow afternoon, Berlin time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate you guys stopping by.
All right, cool. Take care. Bye-bye.